She didn't destroy you. You gave her the sword and taught her where to stab, not out of stupidity, but out of hope. The hope that if you loved harder, bled quieter, obeyed longer, she'd stay. But she didn't want the man who led himself. She wanted the man who served her comfort, and you called it loyalty. Most men today are not conquered by failure. They're conquered by devotion to women who smile while draining the very thing that makes them men. Machiavelli didn't write for romantics. He wrote for rulers. He understood that seduction isn't softness, it's strategy, and if you don't know how to protect your power, she will rewrite your purpose and make you thank her for it. This video isn't about blame, it's about the brutal truth that every man must face. The wrong woman doesn't steal your strength. She makes you donate it, with a smile on your face and a collar around your soul. She didn't empower you, she anesthetized you. She whispered that you were enough, only when you were useful. You didn't grow in her love, you vanished in it. She praised your strength until it stopped serving her comfort, and you mistook that praise for presence. Men don't fall for women. They fall for mirrors that reflect back their starving soul. You didn't crave her, you craved who you got to be around her. That version of you who wasn't doubting, wasn't empty, wasn't exhausted. But she didn't heal you. She hijacked your hunger. You thought she saw you, but she saw your silence, and she knew exactly how to weaponize it. When a man is starving to be understood, even manipulation feels like intimacy. You weren't loved, you were studied. Every confession became a currency. Machiavelli would call this what it is, a quiet war, where the prize is your focus and the weapon is affection. She didn't have to command you. She just had to become the only place you felt real, and so you gave her power with both hands. You thanked her for showing you your worth, but your worth wasn't hers to show. You had it before her, you'll have it after. She didn't give you power. She gave you a stage to perform strength and called it love. There is a particular tragedy in becoming better for someone who benefits from your blindness. She cheered your progress, but never your questions. You changed, improved, adapted, not for freedom, but for survival. And that version of you, it wasn't real, it was rehearsed. The hardest pill to swallow is this: you didn't rise in her presence, you dissolved, and you liked it because it felt like peace. But peace that costs your clarity is just sedation, and sedation wears off. She wasn't your muse. She was your escape hatch from yourself, from your shame, from your scar. But an escape that requires amnesia isn't freedom, it's function. You weren't being loved. You were being erased politely. Symbolically, she was never your power. She was your anesthesia. The hit that let you feel like a man without becoming one. You didn't lose yourself. You gave yourself away to anyone who made the silence stop. You started as a man, but somewhere between her size and your silence, you became a shape. She didn't ask you to shrink, but every time you stood tall, her affection flinched. So you folded, not because you were weak, but because you were addicted to being chosen. You called it compromise, but it was distortion. A slow warping of your center, bent into something more digestible. She didn't want you whole, she wanted you manageable. And every time you refused to resist, she loved you more. Machiavelli would have laughed, because power given without demand is never returned. You weren't her partner, you were her reflection pool, a mirror that kept adjusting its angle to make sure she always looked whole, even when you were breaking. There's a difference between love and loyalty to your captor. You weren't held, you were handled. Your strength was only welcomed when it didn't challenge her softness. And when it did, she called it insensitivity, and you called it your fault. You confused her ease with your value. Every peaceful dinner, every compliment, bought with another piece of your truth. You kept your voice low so hers could stay calm. And when you finally screamed inside, no one noticed, because you'd trained the room to only applaud your silence. This isn't about villainizing her. It's about exposing the ritual you performed to stay wanted. You knew the rules. Be available, be soft, be safe. But never be honest, never be wild, never be full. She didn't reject the real you. She never met him. You spent months, maybe years, surviving her moods, adjusting your tone, your plans, your needs, like a man curating himself for comfort. Not hers, yours, because you thought her calm was love. But it was just the absence of rejection, and that became your drug. Symbolically, she wasn't your partner, she was your regulator. And you became her silence, not her equal. Just the version of you she could sit next to without being triggered. She was chaotic, wounded. You saw her scars and called them sacred, not because she was healing, but because you needed to be needed. You didn't fall for her. You fell for the story where you were the savior. You weren't obsessed with her. You were obsessed with the man you became around her suffering. The one who had purpose, direction, worth. She didn't complete you. She distracted you from your own infection. Machiavelli would have called you useful, a tool in the hands of instability. And the deeper your guilt, the more generous you became. Not because she earned it, but because you feared what you'd be without it. You didn't want her healed. You needed her broken. Every drama was a ritual. She shattered. You repaired. She withdrew. You performed. It looked like love, but it was dependency wearing lipstick. You weren't bonded. You were bound. There's a dark secret most men never admit. Fixing her felt safer than fixing yourself. You didn't feel trapped. You felt righteous, but self-worth built on someone else's chaos is always rented, and she knew the lease would never expire. You weren't healing her, you were protecting yourself from stillness. Because in the silence you'd hear the real wound, that without her distress you felt invisible, so you stayed, not out of love, but out of avoidance. This is what guilt does. It turns love into labor. You didn't chase her because she was irresistible. You chased her because if she got better and left, you'd have to face the fact that you never believed you were enough. Symbolically, she wasn't your redemption. She was your fuel. For the role you cast yourself in, the rescuer, the martyr, the man who fixes. But when fixing becomes identity, love becomes a transaction you can't afford to stop paying into. You stopped speaking, not because you had nothing to say, but because every time you did, something in her shifted. You feared the cold shoulder more than your own self-betrayal. So you swallowed your needs and called it maturity. But it wasn't peace. It was programmed disappearance. At first it felt noble. Taking the hit, avoiding the fight, keeping things smooth. But you weren't keeping the peace. You were crowning her, silently, as your judge, and your sentence was silence. Jung once warned, what you refuse to express becomes what enslaves you. And your silence? It didn't just protect her comfort, it became your cage. Every unsaid truth calcified into resentment, until your own voice sounded foreign in your head. This isn't about yelling, it's about truth. And the slow erosion of a man who edits himself daily to stay acceptable. You weren't loud, you were obedient, and she didn't love you for it. She ruled you through it. The tragedy isn't that she silenced you, it's that you did it willingly, hoping she'd love you more for it. But a man who trades voice for validation is already halfway gone. You thought being easy to live with was love, but it was erasure in disguise. She never asked for your silence, but she rewarded it. And you learned the rule, speak less, lose less. So you stopped showing her the raw edges. You gave her a curated version of you, polished, passive, incomplete. She fell in love with your absence. There's no intimacy without confrontation, no respect without friction. What you feared would push her away was the only thing that could have made you real to her. But instead, you let comfort colonize your truth. Symbolically, your voice became currency. And she bought your obedience, with approval, with warmth, with temporary safety. But in the long run, the cost was brutal. You didn't lose her. You lost yourself. one unspoken truth at a time. You thought loyalty was your gift, but she saw it as a discount. You showed up, stayed late, kept giving, not because she deserved it, but because you were terrified of being replaced. And terror is a terrible foundation for love. The more available you became, the less she valued your presence. Not because she was cruel, but because certainty kills curiosity. You were always there, like furniture, stable, unmoving, expected, and she stopped seeing you the moment you stopped being a challenge. Machiavelli said, "Power is never given, it's taken." And you gave it to her in soft hands and desperate rituals. Loyalty without boundaries becomes performance. You weren't a man, you were an audition, hoping your consistency would earn affection. You gave more when she pulled away. You forgave quicker, bent faster, apologized louder, but the more you proved you'd never leave, the more she tested how far she could push. Not because she hated you, but because you showed her you had no edge. Loyalty should be rooted in alignment, not fear. But you weren't loyal, you were scared. Scared she'd find someone better. Scared your love wasn't enough unless it bled. So you bled and called it devotion. She didn't respect your sacrifice because it never felt optional. It was soaked in obligation, not sovereignty. You weren't giving, you were pleading, and she knew it. Respect dies when a man makes himself too easy to keep. Every act of unreciprocated loyalty carved your spine thinner, and when she left or withdrew or laughed at your effort, you still blamed yourself, not realizing that real loyalty requires the courage to walk away when it's not mutual. And you stayed because absence terrified you more than betrayal. Symbolically, you didn't win her. You auditioned for her mercy. And mercy is given to the weak, not the worthy. She didn't despise your loyalty. She despised that it came from fear, not choice. You offered her safety, not because she asked, but because you believed it would make her stay. You became her emotional shelter, and somewhere between her breakdowns and your patience, you forgot that you had a kingdom to guard. You made yourself available, not like a man, like a fortress with open gates. Every problem she brought, you carried. Every storm she brewed, you absorbed. You weren't her partner, you were her asylum. Machiavelli warned, never walk unarmed into another's court. But you did. You laid down your sword, thinking her approval would protect you. But unarmed men in love are not respected. They're repurposed into tools, into therapists, into background noise. You called it love, but it was a merger built on collapse. Every time she panicked, you forgot your own mission. You weren't helping her. You were abandoning yourself and calling it empathy. There's a brutal irony here. You gave her protection, and she used it to build her exit. Not because she's evil, but because she no longer feared your absence. She turned your refuge into leverage. You were addicted to being needed, because being needed feels like purpose. But what begins in devotion often ends in depletion. And the man who becomes a refuge usually does so after forgetting how to be a ruler. You thought love meant being her landing place, but a landing place without boundaries becomes a crash site. She didn't want a king who bent. She wanted to feel safe, without seeing you collapse to create that feeling. But you collapsed anyway, slowly, beautifully, invisibly. Symbolically, you gave her shelter, but lost your throne. And when the walls came down, you realized you weren't protecting her. You were protecting your fear of being irrelevant. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. It was calm, too calm. You stopped arguing not because there was nothing to say, but because you'd learned that silence buys temporary peace. And she was the merchant of that quiet. You called it maturity, letting things slide, avoiding the fire. But real maturity doesn't mean silence, it means clarity. And you weren't clear, you were buried. Jung warned, the shadow you bury becomes the master you serve. And you buried it deep, the anger, the desire, the edge. You became polite instead of powerful, agreeable instead of grounded. And that false peace became your slow decay. She smiled, you nodded, another day of not disrupting the illusion. But deep down you knew. You weren't balanced, you were sedated. Your aggression didn't vanish, it went underground. It showed up in passive withdrawal, quiet resentment, in the fantasies where you walked away without explanation. But you never did, because you'd already buried your flame under her comfort. There's a difference between being steady and being stuck. You weren't anchored, you were numb, and the numbness didn't come from her. It came from your refusal to confront what her presence was costing you. Your will, your voice, your edge. She loved how peaceful you became, because she never had to face your truth. But peace without depth is just compliance. And a man who confuses absence of conflict with love will slowly erase himself to keep things smooth. Symbolically, her calm wasn't safety. It was sedation. And you kept swallowing it like medicine, not to heal, but to forget what you used to burn for. And a man who forgets his fire dies slowly while smiling. You thought you were loving her, but what you were really doing was disappearing politely, one boundary at a time, one unspoken resentment at a time, until your love became a burial ground. She didn't ask you to vanish, but she didn't stop you either. Because what you gave up willingly became the very currency she used to shape you, and you kept calling it love. Your affection became a leash. The more you gave, the more permission she felt to edit you. And you let her, because you believed love meant surrender. But love that demands your erasure isn't love, it's absorption. Machiavelli wrote that power hides behind masks, and affection in your case became a mask for control. She didn't have to demand compliance. You offered it, hoping devotion would earn permanence. But you were never permanent in her eyes, just functional. She loved your availability, but flinched when you brought depth. She praised your presence, but punished your perspective. And you kept adjusting the volume of your truth until she could live comfortably inside your silence. There's a lie most men tell themselves. If I love her enough, she'll finally love me fully. But what she loved was the version of you who never made her confront herself. Not the full man, just the edited shadow. You became a placeholder, a stand-in for her fantasy, a buffer for her emptiness. And the more you tried to prove your value, the more invisible you became, because she never wanted your whole, just your obedience. Symbolically, you weren't her partner. You were her strategy. An agreement signed in silence. A contract that read, I'll love you as long as you don't make me feel anything real. So now the question isn't, why did she do this to you? It's, why did you stay silent while it happened? Why did you keep proving your worth to someone who only valued the version of you that didn't resist? What if everything you were trying to become for her was exactly what you abandoned in yourself? This isn't about hating women. It's about refusing to kneel in the name of being loved. You're not here to be tamed. You're here to rebuild what you surrendered, your edge, your clarity, your soul. So now ask yourself, what would it look like to choose yourself without apology? If that question burns, it means the man inside you is still alive and waiting. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep walking this path of brutal self-knowledge and emotional freedom. You gave her your loyalty because you thought she was different. But what if the ones who feel the safest are the ones who've studied you best? In the next video, Machiavelli's silent warning about the women you think you can trust.